1960s and 1970s, with the liberalisation of the divorce laws, liberalisation of abortion laws, liberalisation of contraceptives, have always been the thin edge of the wedge. They have always meant that where the law started is not where we end. And we have no reason to believe that the passing of the Euthanasia bill will be any different. When they cleared the way for abortion, they said that it was only in the most extreme circumstances. But today we have abortion on demand. And we wipe out the size of a city in England every single year. When they liberalised divorce laws, they said it would be only for the most extreme circumstances. Now we have no-fault divorces. This euthanasia bill has presumptuously started its life dealing with the most extreme circumstances. Over 18, last 6 months to life, terminal prognosis or diagnosis. But it will not end in that way. And we see that by looking at Canada and the Netherlands, where euthanasia has been offered to young, physically abled people who are merely depressed. Ladies and gentlemen, this bill that we are passing in the United Kingdom has all the holes of a kitchen sieve. All that a person needs to do to have their condition diagnosed as terminal is simply to refuse treatment. People with bulimia, people with diabetes can achieve a euthanasia by simply refusing NHS treatment, and then they will be able to push for the ability to euthanatize themselves. The fact of the matter is that this bill is not fit for purpose. The safeguards that have been put in place, that 2 doctors agree, and that a High Court judge also reviews the case, is nothing but sophism. How many of you, raise your hand, have had difficulty getting an appointment with a GP in the last year? Do you honestly expect that the GPs have the time to do the in-depth investigation, that the doctors have the time to do the in-depth investigation to see whether someone is really uncoerced? Our courts at this time are completely flooded with cases. They can't manage the caseload that they've got. There are people on remand waiting over a year to hear their case heard in court. And we're supposed to believe that a High Court judge will have the chance to review each case to make sure that there's no coercion. Do you honestly believe that a court judge will question the diagnosis of a doctor? The reality is, ladies and gentlemen, that the safeguards promised in this bill are no safeguards at all. This is simply a fast track to a euthanasia without any safeguards in place, and the safeguards that are supposed to be there will be nothing but a rubber stamp. Ladies and gentlemen, assisting someone in suicide in this country is punishable by up to 14 years imprisonment. And that is exactly how it should be. And why, ladies and gentlemen? Because this law is not just designed to save the vulnerable from the manipulative, it is also designed to save the vulnerable from themselves. How many old ladies and old men would feel themselves a burden to their families or to the NHS, which is already swamped with bed blockers? Ladies and gentlemen, these people are vulnerable to societal pressure. They already feel guilty for burdening the rest of society with their conditions. And now we're saying to them, you can end your life. How many of the vulnerable will be able to resist that kind of peer pressure? How many of them would be able to resist the pressure from unscrupulous sons and unscrupulous daughters and cousins and aunties who see a big paycheck just around the corner in a will? Or rather want to free themselves from the guilt and the burden and the suffering that comes with looking after the elderly and the infirm. The reason why suicide is a criminal, assisting in suicide is a criminal offence in the UK, is because it still has Christianity hard-baked into the culture, the constitution, and the laws, ladies and gentlemen. We as Christians believe that men and women, regardless of any other factor, are made in the image of God. And that image imbues their person with value irregardless of other conditions, irregardless of other circumstances. All human beings have equal dignity and equal value. The Euthanasia bill is rooted in a doctrine that says that your value as a human being is directly connected to your social output rather than your social cost. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the passing of the Euthanasia bill is attempting to put a cost on the value of life itself. Ladies and gentlemen, every time that we take a sword or an axe to the value of human life, to the doctrine of the sanctity of human life, rooted in the Christian belief in the Emmatio Dei, we hack our way forward to the path of eugenics, ladies and gentlemen. Eugenics was a central doctrine of the National Socialist Party in Nazi Germany. Eugenics decides that there is some life unworthy of life, that there is some life more valuable than other life. And when we hack away at the sanctity of life rooted in the doctrine of the Emmatio Dei, we open up the way for eugenics. When abortion was started, it cleared a way by which we could begin to abort children for operable and curable conditions. We abort children in this country for having cleft lips and cleft feet that can be healed. We abort children because they might be deaf or blind. We abort children because they have autism. Ladies and gentlemen, the abortion law cleared the way for eugenics, and the euthanasia law will clear the way for eugenics. The Nazis didn't lose in 1945. Their victory was suspended and hijacked by liberal progressives. And this highlights, ladies and gentlemen, a fact in our country that we have failed to see, because we no longer educate the souls in the United Kingdom. We only educate about outward facts. We have lost sight of the fact that your doctrines affect your values. If you don't have the doctrine of Immatio Dei, you don't have the sanctity of life. If you don't have the doctrine that each human life is made in the image of God, then you measure the value of each human life by another condition. And this highlights a truth that the liberal world needs to recognize, because it does matter. This value, this truth, needs to affect our immigration policy, our welfare policy, our policies around divorce, and our policies around the NHS and the running of the NHS. Your doctrines affect your values, ladies and gentlemen. As Christians, we believe that suicide is a sin. And so from our perspective, there is no more greater cruelty that you can do to a man or a woman who is about to meet their judge and maker than encourage them to commit a mortal sin right before they do. That is condemning souls to hell, ladies and gentlemen. That is not compassion. That, ladies and gentlemen, is selfishness, ruthlessness, savagery, and an unmerciful attitude. Christians believe that suffering works as an alarm clock to the soul. It draws man to God. That is why when so many people suffer, they cry out to God. And as harsh as it is, and as hard as it is to see people suffer, there is in there a divine mercy, because in that suffering, their soul cries out to their Creator, because God wills that all should be saved. And so the suffering that is hard-coded into natural law is designed to shepherd man, all men, towards God in the end, so that all might be saved. What this debate shows, ladies and gentlemen, is that we in the United Kingdom and the Western world at large need a better narrative about death. And I would encourage you to read the likes of ethicists like Stanley Hauerwas in Naming of the Silencers, and other works by him that talk about the idea of how we should educate people to approach death like we educate people to approach puberty. Puberty is a life stage. Death is a life stage. And when we swept away religion in our arrogance, we swept away a natural vehicle of education about death itself. And so people tremble and fear about going to death because they have no vision of life after death. And it is fear that is at the heart of this bill, ladies and gentlemen, not love, not compassion. Rather than funding an overstretched NHS to kill those that are suffering, we should invest the money in increasing palliative care for the dying and support those who are dying to die in dignity, ladies and gentlemen. There are ways now that we can reduce their suffering, ways that allow them to die in dignity without a euthanasia. Through the use of AI and technology, we can sedate those to whom the pain has just become too intolerable. They can decide to say goodbye to their families, and then they can be sedated so that they are not conscious of the pain, and then allow the disease to take them as it would naturally, ladies and gentlemen. And that is an alternative better than a euthanasia. When St. John Paul II was dying of Parkinson's disease, he very deliberately continued to suffer in his public office. I remember a week before his death being inside St. Peter's Square in the Vatican on Palm Sunday. And on that day, St. John Paul II was rolled out, and he gave the traditional blessing on that Sunday, despite the fact that his body and mind had been ravaged by disease. He did that because of holy wisdom. He did that because he had the foresight to see which way the world was going, the culture was going, that he described in Humanite Vitae as a culture of death, ladies and gentlemen. He showed that you can face the ravages of disease and death with heroism and virtue and courage and faithfulness. And he demonstrated that despite all the pain, you can still operate in a productive way. There is another way, ladies and gentlemen, than the euthanasia bill. But it means that we must return to the Christian faith rather than continue to go down the path of self-destruction that has been wrought upon us by the cancer of liberalism. We must return to a muscular Christian faith to save the West, to save ourselves from this disease that is the liberal elites. Any questions on the topic?